If you are around 30 and everything in your life looks fine on the outside but feels strangely heavy on the inside, if late at night you catch yourself wondering whether this is really the life you worked so hard for, then this story is for you. Because turning 30 is not just about age, it is a psychological checkpoint where a person finally looks into the mirror and sees not just their face but their choices, fears, silence, and the dreams they quietly abandoned. Ryan was exactly at that point, newly 30, living in a mid-sized apartment in a busy American city, waking up to the same alarm, driving the same route to his corporate office downtown, attending the same meetings, answering the same emails. Earning a decent salary, being called successful by friends and family, yet feeling an emptiness he could never properly explain. His life was not bad, it just didn't feel like it belonged to him anymore. Psychology says people don't burn out from working too hard, they burn out from living without meaning, and Ryan felt that truth every morning when he stood in front of the bathroom mirror asking himself why he felt tired before the day even started. At 30, society quietly turns into a scoreboard. People ask about promotions, marriage, stability, and future plans, and under that pressure people stop listening to their inner voice because the brain's job is not to make us happy but to keep us safe. So it whispers things like, don't change now, be practical, this is how everyone lives, and slowly fear begins to sound like logic. One afternoon at work Ryan noticed a 24-year-old intern full of curiosity and confidence. Asking questions without hesitation, excited about learning, and in that moment Ryan didn't just see the intern, he saw himself from 7 years ago, and it hit him that he hadn't lost his dreams with age, he had lost his courage. That night he scrolled through social media watching people move to New York, launch startups in California, get married, travel the world, and the comparison hurt more at 30 because it was no longer about dreams but results. And then came the question he had been avoiding for years, if everything ended tomorrow, would I choose to live this exact life again? And the silence that followed was the loudest answer he had ever heard. Later he found an old note he had written to himself in college that said, when I turn 30, I don't want to lie to myself, and that single sentence shook him because lying to himself was exactly what he had been doing, pretending he was satisfied. Pretending he didn't want more, pretending this was enough. Psychology teaches that real change begins the moment we name our fear instead of running from it, and Ryan didn't make any dramatic decisions. He didn't quit his job or move across the country, he simply made a quiet promise to himself to stop running away. He started choosing small things that made him feel alive again, writing at night, taking long walks without his phone. Saying no when something didn't feel right, stopping the habit of pleasing everyone except himself, because self-respect is not built through big announcements but through small brave choices repeated daily. Slowly his life didn't look very different from the outside, but inside he felt lighter, clearer, more honest, and what Ryan began to understand was that the real fear at 30 is not failure. It is realizing how easy it is to live on autopilot for decades without ever asking whether the direction is right. He noticed how many people around him were busy but emotionally numb. How conversations revolved around complaining yet no one actually wanted change, how weekends were spent escaping instead of recovering, and psychology explains this as emotional avoidance. Where people stay constantly distracted to avoid facing uncomfortable truths, Ryan started noticing his own avoidance patterns too, how he reached for his phone the moment silence appeared, how he filled every free moment with noise. Because silence forced him to hear his own thoughts, and once he allowed himself to sit with that discomfort, something unexpected happened. The anxiety slowly turned into clarity. He realized that he didn't need a completely different life. He needed a more honest one. He needed to stop measuring himself by timelines that weren't his, because comparison is the fastest way to disconnect from your own path. At 30, the illusion that everyone else knows what they're doing feels strong. But the truth is most people are improvising while pretending to be certain. Ryan began to redefine success not as speed but as alignment, not as achievement but as peace. He understood that being behind in someone else's race doesn't mean you are behind in your own. Psychology calls this identity realignment, the phase where a person shifts from living according to external validation to internal values. And it often feels uncomfortable, lonely, and confusing before it feels freeing. There were days Ryan doubted himself, days he felt impatient, days he wondered if he was wasting time by slowing down, but each time he chose honesty over distraction. He felt a little more grounded. He started having deeper conversations, setting boundaries, letting go of relationships that existed only out of habit, and building a quieter but stronger connection with himself. Turning 30 didn't magically solve his life, but it gave him something far more valuable: awareness. And awareness changes everything, because once you see clearly, you can no longer pretend, you can no longer unknow what you know. And that is the real reason this age feels heavy for so many people, not because they are failing, but because they are waking up, and waking up is uncomfortable. It forces you to grieve the version of yourself you thought you would become, while also taking responsibility for the person you are becoming now. Ryan finally understood that growth doesn't always feel like motivation. Sometimes it feels like restlessness, honesty, and quiet resistance to a life that no longer fits. And as he stepped into his early 30s, his life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became real, and that made all the difference, because the people who learn to question their lives at 30 are the ones who build them intentionally at 40. So if you are standing at this point feeling lost, heavy, or uncertain, remember this: you are not breaking down, you are breaking free from a version of yourself built on fear, expectations, and survival. And this moment, uncomfortable and confusing as it feels, is often the beginning of a life that finally feels like your own. Brain sparkles.